We've got lots of notes here as well. And I'm seeing some general clustering in terms of the green being a little bit left of the scaling phase. So from this kind of ideation to transition to scale phase. I'm seeing a lot of pink Post-it notes consolidating around the proof of concept to scale phase as well. And I'm seeing yellow Post-it notes also around that. So with a very, very broad generalization, I'm going to assume one of the challenges is as we're getting to this stage, as the lady nicely articulated earlier, from needing to switch from less commercial in theory to more commercial funding, or from the kind of de-risking the solution to proving the business model, we have a lot of challenges in terms of where things are falling off. Could I ask for a volunteer to just provide us with an example of one? I think the question was asked to me, but I'm very interested for any of you guys. One venture in your portfolio that stalled or failed to raise the next round, and why that happened. We don't necessarily need to go into all of these, and I don't know that many people's names, so I will just randomly start calling on people. But does anybody want to just share one example? Yes, if that's possible.
Sure, so it actually wasn't in my current portfolio, it was in a previous one, but they were great, they were in e-waste, and they had 3 investors to come in, I think it was $10 million, and then the lead investor dropped out. And the other 2 investors were still keen, but wouldn't come in without the lead investor, and so they spent the next 3 years looking for another lead investor.
I don't even know what to do this. Is that something that others have also found in terms of their portfolios? So maybe just quick show of hands. Who funds here? Who does funding? Okay. So kind of, who enables the capital continuum as well? Okay. So we had some people that didn't raise their hand at all. What do you do?
I represent a venture.
Okay.
Looking for funding.
And how do you think, and can we put you on the spot?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, then, very interesting one is, what sector do you work in?
Water treatment, household water purification.
So you're just having an easy time raising funding.
I wish.
It's just flowing to you. And where are you at in your kind of capital journey for now?
Yeah, so I feel like we're at transition to scale, but interestingly on 1 or 2 business models. But then there's a model that we're still proving that could work. So we're sort of like stuck in between those 2.
And when you go to raise funding, what do you find is the feedback that you most frequently get?
So right now, if I hear economically sustainable, we need you to retail one more time.
Okay.
So right now, the biggest thing is that one of our biggest customers is NGOs, and then the NGOs ultimately donate the product. So we are trying to prove that there's retail demand for the product from the end users. So we are getting pilot stage funding for that, but being able to now get to a certain sweet spot where we get scaled capital is where we're struggling.
And who funded you to date, if you don't mind us asking? Nobody.
Private, high net worth individuals.
So angel networks.
Yep.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, so our solution is called SAWA, which stands for Safe Water. It's a household water purification solution, a 6-liter collapsible jerry can, which uses SODIS, which is solar disinfection, to treat water. So just up to 4 hours in the sun, and you eliminate bacteria, viruses, and protozoa from the water. And it has been endorsed and proved by the World Health Organization as a 1-star rating for elimination of harmful pathogens.
So your technology per se has been de-risked, and now it's finding someone that will come de-risk the business model testing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And for this corner as well, don't think I wasn't going to pull you guys back in. In terms of the question in terms of, let's say, most requested financial instrument. So we've got an example here of a very pointed solution disrupting a deal, right? Not being able to have a lead founder. We've got the kind of challenge that, what was your name again? Caroline was explaining in terms of having the technology de-risk, but not kind of finding someone that can do the business model de-risking. Of any of the funders here, when you guys are like hearing from your ventures and you're looking to find follow-on funding or they come approach you, what funding instrument do they most often ask for? Okay, I think you might be the only funder over there. Although I feel like Ben, he's got some funding as well.
This is Emmeline from FCGO, if you're on the other side of the pillar from me. So yeah, we provide grant funding. We're a traditional donor, although we're not allowed to call ourselves donors anymore because the FCGO is shifting its approach to becoming more of an investor rather than a donor. But what we see in the Kenyan context is the same enterprises coming back for grants again and again and again. We call them grantpreneurs or pitchpreneurs because they keep coming back. And I think we're worried that they're not moving along the continuum. And are we creating dependencies by continuing? We might give a grant, GIZ might have supported them before, they might have got something from a foundation before that, we see the same enterprises going around and around. But then looking at your timeline where we see they may not get VC until year 8, maybe that's not a problem. And I'm really intrigued to hear from others, like, is it an issue if we keep giving grants to the same organizations, or should we be realistic and say it can take years and they may be dependent on grant financing for a long time? But I think we're not being asked for blended financing mechanisms, maybe as much as we should be. And I think maybe we need to move into that space and think more how we work with other funders to use our capital in more of a catalytic way that can enable the organizations to go beyond grants.
We've got 2 responses over here ready from that 3.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to respond from the perspective of a ongoing pitchpreneur who've struggled sort of exactly with what you're talking about. I think from our perspective, really it has been what has stopped us from progressing as quickly as we'd like is not just funding and different kinds of funding, but I was just saying, I think it's as a first-time founder, you hit a certain stage where you've done proof of concept, you've got the data, and now it's ready to scale. But your organization needs to change internally, you need to restructure internally, as well as get the funding to scale. And I wonder if one of the ways to unlock this bottleneck is to make sure that there's funding not only for scale, but funding and expertise, because the hardest thing is to find that expertise locally. You know, I've been referred to firms in all parts of the world, but you want someone who understands the local context. So if funders could consider funding for that organization to keep the lights on and get expertise in how they might transform to be able to partner to scale or scale directly, as well as the funding to scale. I think that's a really big gap we've identified. Talking to so many funders, it doesn't seem to exist. People want to fund the scale, or, you know, like you say, they're reluctant to keep funding. And the real bottleneck is about helping that capacity to evolve within an organization from a funding and a skill and a expertise perspective.
Okay, we've got is it Pretty? We've got the 2, and then the 2 gentlemen at the back. And then I promise we'll then move on to the next set of slides as well.
Yeah. So I actually, hi Yasmin. So I actually wanted to respond to her, and coming from the other side where Project Last Mile offers technical assistance from, you know, Coca-Cola's best practices and IP. We are also struggling to actually get funding to be able to support ventures or enterprises with our technical support in order to help them to scale, to help them understand their customers better, how to segment their customers, where to locate their service points efficiently, etc. And it's really been a struggle to actually convince any donor that this is something that is useful for enterprises to be successful. So yeah, it's just a conundrum there as well that I wanted to highlight.
No, thank you. And I'll hold back on an immediate response. These guys as well.
No, thanks. I work for CARE, and maybe just a quick example. I think companies that are used to grants will always ask for grants, yeah? And until you change the DNA of your organization. Because, for example, we as CARE are an NGO, and therefore when businesses come to us, they come to us looking for grants, and that's because of our DNA. So what we've been able to do as CARE, we've actually registered an offshoot out of CARE, which is now transitioning businesses from the normal traditional grants, which we have worked with before, and then transition them to investments. But that comes with, like she said, I think, a restructuring and a change of your DNA, but also a change of how you perceive investment, because you cannot use the same skills that you have in the foundation, in the NGO, to come into the investment space as well. So there needs to be a change as well in terms of internally, how do you couple skills with what you want to do. But once again, I think businesses that are used to grants will always want grants because it's easy money. Yeah. So until you change that, then that's when you see a bit of a difference as well. Thanks.
Oh, great.
Two more?
Yeah. Oh, and then Sue.
No, and I think it speaks to the fact that we have instruments that we're missing. So it's either black or white. So it's grants or commercial capital, or there could be vehicles or money that is moving us from free money to concessional to commercial. And where you just do it milestone based, as you're achieving your milestones, the funding becomes more and more progressively commercial. Plus we have, and I think this is one of these tricky things, trying to talk to donors as well, why can't we create a better link between donor money being leveraged up against commercial capital? And that's the other bit where we often have a chat with donors and ask, so if I had this money, would you be willing to put an LOI or MOU almost saying that we will leverage this money if you bring it? They would smile at me and say, that's a great idea. I don't think it's something we're ready to do, as much as it's pretty much something to be straight up. So I think we have instruments that clearly are just missing as well. That would be a pathway, and we're not looking at pathways. So instruments are sitting on their own rather than it's a pathway that is created between investors and funders in a finance stream.
Yeah, that's a great point. Then in CARE's case, right, they've created their own instrument because they don't see it out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak on the grants again, like Emmeline was saying, on the grantpreneurs that we've been experiencing, and also the reason we were conducting this mapping on where investment is going is also that we also have started to rethink the way we are using grants and saying that we need to use them to de-risk, as you know, to come out then as non-commercial capital, if at all, so that then the venture can unlock, you know, different debt or equity, you know, outwards. There's nothing wrong with building, you know, with a grant, because particularly in climate where it's like it's a long R&D phase. However, we have experience, and particularly in the call that we just did, the Joint Innovation Facility, where we're seeing grantpreneurs, you know, it's like, oh, they've hopped from USAID, FCDO, UNDP, now GIZ, but we cannot actually see products, and that's where the problem is, where it's like there's not a product that came off that funding. But then now coming back to think of how we can start blending these instruments so that then they can be leveraged, as Ian is saying, so that then they're actually working. Because again, if we're giving this money, we're saying let it make sense, you know, in your growth plan within the venture, or also the venture having an understanding of what is the kind of money they need. So by the time they're coming for a grant, then they know within their roadmap what else they would be unlocking right after that. So whether they'd be using it as a guarantee or whatever, but yeah, so that we're also starting to rethink that.
And I think, Matthias?
Yeah, I also just wanted to add that I think there was a question also earlier on how we use the instruments. And I think the knowledge of many international organizations or like this is the only instruments that we can use. So the question is rather, how do we hack this instrument that we unlock also the money that is in the system to be instrumentalized, but in a different way. So to look at our due diligence processes, to align them, to make it work, and have an kind of more private sector or like economically driven perspective on it, and not like, oh, it's end of the year, we have to get rid of our money. And this is also reality, right? So we have to ask ourselves, what are we capable of, like in the case of international agencies and development partners. But we want to also learn how this blends in another logic of investment. But the money is there. Why not use it? And we have to change the reputation of grants and how we use them. But yeah, I think that's it's good that we have this labeling, but going down and to see like how can we put it to good use in such a capital stack.
Okay, Ben and then Abby, and this gentleman as well, whose name tag I can't see. Sorry, I'm reading name tags. The benefit of glasses.
Yep.
Josiah.
Great. Thanks, David. So I'm Ben Bellows, one of the co-founders and the chief business officer at NIVI. We're a digital health platform. We engage consumers on digital health journeys. We've reached more than 2 million individuals across now 5 markets. We're looking at expanding into 7 next year. And it's driven now with a commercial agreement, a global agreement with a large a global pharma manufacturer, with MSD. So we've grown out of the development sector space. We started with grants 9 years ago here in Kenya. We're a US-based company, but started from experiences here in Kenya. So we leveraged grants to grow our commercial footprint. We've struggled to raise any investment that wasn't grant-based, though, with our current model. And part of this has been a question of timing. I think our initial funding, $6 million in grants, got us to where we could now generate $3 million in revenue, largely out of the dev sector, but with a model that works in commercial spaces, and which is now being bought into by MSD. We've got this global agreement in place. We're now executing on that. So it's really interesting. This is the first time I've actually sat down and had conversations. My other co-founder, he's more on the startup space. My background's in public health and an epidemiologist by trade. So when I'm sitting down and hearing these, the schematic and the framework here today, it's very helpful to kind of reflect a bit on our journey and the challenges in timing. I feel like we've landed a lot of things well, but we're still struggling on this financing piece. And I think in part, people look at our early grants and said, well, why would we put in equity now? We're operating in LMICs, so debt becomes high risk, I think, for the debt side. And then the grant funders are now looking at us and saying, well, you've got a commercial model in place. Why would we give you grants at this point? So we've kind of got this, I don't know, catch-22 from 3 different directions when it comes to financing. So putting that out there just to share.
No, really clear. Really, really good example. I'm just going to go to Abby first, then Josiah, then we'll conclude with you, and then we'll come back. And we've got more questions that we're getting into as well. But this is really great. Thanks.
Thanks.
You're going to keep sitting down. It's a bit weird standing up on the platform.
I just wanted to add, too, a bit about what Sue and Matthias were saying just now, which is that I think across the board, not so much in this room, but outside this room, there's a real tendency to believe the BS of like what it is to be an entrepreneur. And I think that's within like the finance and capital side, but also among entrepreneurs. Like, in other parts of the world, entrepreneurs access grants, massive amounts of grants for a really long time, particularly from within domestic systems. So the problem isn't that people in organizations are reliant on grants, it's that we are designing those grants badly. And I think that's to Sue's point of saying, like, how can we set these businesses up for success? Like, we're creating the wrong incentives and putting businesses in the wrong direction. I think when I talk to startups, that's what they're saying, like, is the problem with this grantpreneurship model. It's that we're not actually then aligning with what the next step might be. And I think the other thing, which also resonated with what you said, is that my perception is that VCs are extraordinarily risk averse, and we think of ourselves as kind of the development agencies or development funders as the ones who get to be risk averse, and we're not. We're the ones who have to de-risk for private capital, and we often find that almost like an insult. I think when we have these conversations internally, like, why should we have to do that? Because they're going to make money off it and we're carrying the risk. But I think we have to know that that's the world in which we're actually operating. We have to kind of either accept that or do something different. But I think this conversation about, like, how do we how do we use that, those different kinds of capital and really look at the kind of instruments that we can start introducing to the system to make some of those flows work. I think it also requires us to really think quite deeply about the stories we're being told and the reality, which is not unique in Africa. I think in these markets, often there is a sense of like, we need to be oriented around the private sector in a way that isn't necessarily true in, say, Europe and North America, is my perception.
No, great point. And I think even more so in the type of sectors that we're looking at, right, where there's longer R&D cycles as well. Josiah?
Just one comment as well. Abby said, this is exactly what this work is trying to do.
No.
So thinking about longer term capital continuum and a stack that actually makes sense for a journey for an entrepreneur. So rather than it being sort of short-term cycles of just like, where can I pick up funding? I need to go here, here, and here. It's actually trying to design a process for an entrepreneur to get the right type of capital at the right time. Now, it's not easy to do because obviously an entrepreneur's journey is circular. Things change, you have to adapt. But this is trying to give you at least the landscape of the view of how that can happen. And that's what this work is all about.
So thank you. I feel like I'm in the lion's den at the moment. See, so I hope this is a safe space. Yeah.
What organization are you from? Just frame that for us.
So I'm from iSpace, based in Ghana, and I run an innovation hub. And this whole, pitchpreneur conversations that we're having, I will throw the ball back to the funding organizations. You created that. Because a lot of the time you are copying each other. MasterCard will do exactly the same program. GIZ will replicate that. So as
specifically Olaf.
Right.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, what we see is, again, they will just apply for all of these programs, and then when they get it, right? And then also from the funders end, you're more or less ticking boxes. At the end of the year, you want to say, I funded X amount of people, whether they had a product or not. It's not part of your remit. So then what happens is, you are just going to keep funding people that just show up for programs in that respect. I think another way around it is innovation hubs already know who has an idea, who is working on MVP or proof of concept, who has traction, and all of these other things, and what various stages they're in terms of what funding that they need. So you need to tap into their pipeline. There's nothing wrong in you going to an innovation hub and saying, we want to run a program to support, let's say, climate change or whatever. Do you have X amount of entrepreneurs in your ecosystem that we can work with? That is us giving you the credible startups that are in our ecosystem. So that cuts out that grantpreneur type situation, right? But what happens is because you are all replicating the same programs, you're going to get the same individuals applying for exactly the same programs. See, so we should not make it seem like grants are a bad thing, just like the lady said, because from the Elon Musks of this world, they've existed on grants. It's the outcome that we need to look at. The question is, what do we need to do with the grants in order for us to get the outcome that we're looking for, rather than make it look like this hopping around getting grants? Because in our ecosystem, it's very hard to raise funds anyway. See, so as an entrepreneur, you're going to figure out whichever way possible to get the funds to do what it is that you need to do. So, yeah.
Great points, Josiah. Let's last point from here. Then I'll just do a quick feedback, and then we'll move on to the next bit, because I do want to show you guys this tool that we've been trying to develop as well, and how that links to this conversation.
I'm sorry, I do something thanks to Ben. As there is investors in the room, I would like to make a case. We are talking about grantpreneurs. We are talking about donor money that can actually leverage investments. I've seen yesterday the presentation, the third key stage presentation, where we spoke about discovery, distribution, democratizing. My organization, Healthy Entrepreneurs, is in the distribution stage. We are looking for investments, and we can actually fastly scale and replicate our model, saving millions of lives, actually reaching millions of people, and actually it just requires a small investment. If we go purely public or private with equity and debt, our growth will be very much restricted. So I'm turning you because I put my investment on my back.
Yeah.
It's a one-off investment of $400 that makes a community health worker for 10 years generate additional 70% additional income while actually reducing the cost to access of care with 60%. This model is so much impactful. And at the same time, we are completely stuck in our scaling phase because actually the money isn't available. The private investors consider it too riskful. Grant money isn't available because actually we are talking about larger numbers. We can easily do thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands health workers. So I'm really asking a call for action that actually such models, whereas actually entrepreneurship comes in, needs to have this blended type of funding. Ben, I think we speak the same language, yeah? And I've seen the returns, I've seen the expectations, but what I don't see is where the impact comes in. And how does impact actually value and actually is considered as a proper return of investment? Thank you.
Well, Sue was wondering if we were going to get practical into capital stacks today. So we're going to figure out Joost's capital stack. And I think to some extent what you're saying, right, is like this grant funding can actually be incredibly valuable. And I think, just thinking about like a few threads here as well. We almost have this weird inversion, right, where at the very early stage, we're not coordinating. We're not collaborating. We're not giving big tickets. We're not necessarily being as innovative. And then at the later stage, we're trying to coordinate on big blended finance instruments where perhaps pointed solutions can play a bigger role. Finding a co-funder, finding, being able to bring debt and equity together at the right time. So I think, what I think I really hear and one of the work we're doing right now is looking at venture studios, because what you're actually saying, and I think the ladies, Yasmin, what you guys are saying is at the early stage, you need financing and technical assistance aligned, and it needs to be localized. I think it's Josiah saying to some point as well, because you guys are the ones that know what's going to work on the ground. And that's the space where we're not seeing a lot of collaboration, a lot of coordination. I do a lot of work on ESOs in Kenya. And what the ESOs all asked us for was, can we just have like an accelerator tracker so we can stop accelerator hopping? And I think, Emily, to your point, it's less, is that the entrepreneur's problem, or is that our problem that we're not giving enough capital to any of these companies to not have to come back and ask for more? So I think rethinking about grants to the early stage, aligning it with technical assistance, better collaboration, all of that's much easier said than done. But I think we've got this like perverse incentive where we're trying to collaborate at this late stage, but not the early stage. And Matthias, who's actually the kind of brainchild and GIZ behind this whole project that we've been doing here, but also the projects that we've been running with Olaf and Sue over the last year, was like at the later stage, it's some really practical stuff, like shared lawyers for DFIs. It's these really kind of pointed solutions that can have a big impact as well. So somehow in the next 30 minutes, we're going to shift from this very big conversation to figuring out 3 or 4 quite practical things that we could think about taking forward from here, or ideas that IDIA can think about working on. Is it, trying to think about 2 or 3 sectors? So we're hearing health, really complex capital stack that's not well understood and there's not enough success cases. Should we dive deeper into that? Is there something about the funding instruments at this kind of proof of concept, I even forget this, sorry guys, from time to time, ideation to proof of concept stage, where actually we need more innovation on financing instruments? And you have really interesting foundations now exploring stuff like convertible grants, right? What that actually looks like in practice, I think we're all trying to understand, but they're trying to experiment more and innovate more with these types of solutions. And then the last thing is, as I was saying with Matthias, what are some of these pointed things that you can actually do as GIZ or DFIs that hack the system, where you're not going to change a country, which is GIZ, on its own, right? But maybe there's ways you can navigate within it. Or, we were doing some work with the Small Foundation. I don't know if anybody here knows them. They are doing really interesting stuff right now. They're a foundation. They don't have the bureaucratic constraints that you have if you're a DFI. So they're saying, we'll use your lawyer and we'll come in. Or we can de-risk at this point, Abby, to your point, maybe Judith Nielsen can do this as well. We'll de-risk this bit that's a bit too risky for a DFI to do, because at the end of the day, their incentives are to get some type of performance from it. And I think that takes us to a very quick bit of feedback here around then, okay, what are some of the other things we've heard outside of this room? Because I think there's 2 things we want to make sure is, one, as the kind of more development-orientated community, we don't become an echo chamber for each other. Yeah, we need more grants, you know? And I actually think grants are a fantastic tool when done right. The second thing is we need to figure out how we better coordinate with some of these funders outside of this room. Because if you look at the amount of funding and the amount of active funders we showed you at the beginning, concessional funders are still only, you know, even in this space, a quarter, a fifth, right? There's a whole other universe out there that we need to make sure that we're aligning with. And so the point of this framework was really so people could help locate themselves. And that more than that, they could also think as well about like what the different, you know, to your point, actually seeing that there's a normative model to say you don't need to rush into commercial funding, but we do need to think a little bit more innovatively around this. And I think the biggest value addition from this exercise was actually just mapping this to companies to show you the number of years it takes to actually progress through these stages. Because you guys know this, VC funds are set up for 5 to 7 years returns, right? They're never going to make ag tech or climate tech or any of these things work unless there's really deep secondary markets. So I think part of what we're trying to do is also shift the mindset around how long these capital continuums take. And as you know, donors are often telling us at the early stage, and I think, Josiah, this is where you guys can probably play a major role, is donors like the World Bank, they come in, set up an accelerator program because somebody at the head of the World Bank says soil health is now the most important thing that we need to focus on, or they've given a loan to the Kenyan government and they've told them to do that. And they come in and they will end up just creating another accelerator for soil health where those soil health companies have actually already received 25 to 50K grants. So their real challenge is knowing what companies have already received, what companies have gone through what, to your point, who are actually good businesses to work with. And also they need to know that they're ESOs that they should already be working with rather than just trying to come and duplicate things. What we heard as well is at the foundation stage, at this R&D to proof of concept stage, and I think maybe this reflects a little bit of what you're saying, is it's really hard to find this balance between flexibility and experimentation and also commercialization. How do you create those right incentives? And this was from colleagues or friends of ours with Jets at Spark, where we actually hosted a panel previously, and it was the Doan Foundation, and they were saying, this is really where we want to step in, because this is where we see the biggest challenge, and we want to experiment and play around with new types of tools. I think as you were saying over here in terms of proof of concept, Caroline, is you can get at that proof of concept stage, the technology works, but the real challenge is the business model. Like, how do you actually find funders that are willing to de-risk and step in there? Because they might think, okay, we've done the technology, now it's the private sector's role. But actually, it's hugely high risk. And as Abby was saying, VCs are not that, I mean, I don't want to criticize them because being in this, like studying entrepreneurship for 15 years, it wasn't like there was somebody before VCs. It wasn't like there was all this capital going into like semi-risky businesses, right? No one was. So they do have an important role to play, but oftentimes this is a bit too early for them. What we often find at the transition to scale phase is just when you need to start getting just as like you get to the stage where you need to start being more commercial, sometimes a lot of the challenge with the type of LPs that back impact investors is that they're still wanting those companies to have impact. It becomes a really big tension as they're trying to attract additional funding. So I think I'm just repeating exactly what you guys have all been saying as we go to the next exercise, and I am rushing through it a bit. And a big thing I see at this stage is you lose momentum. And I think this was sorry, I didn't actually ask for your name. Grace. This was what Grace was highlighting a bit with her company, right? Was because they couldn't find the lead funder, the company lost momentum, and they had to spend 3 years just trying to figure that out because they couldn't figure out that kind of handover at that stage. And that's where I think we need to think about tools and opportunities that can help better connect with other funders as well. And I think what you find, right, which we're not really speaking about in this room, because I don't think we have a lot of late-stage DFIs. Let me just double-check. Yes, we didn't have a lot of like DFIs necessarily in here, is they don't think anything's investable. I mean, go speak to the IFC. Go speak to, BII. They'll tell you the reason we keep giving Sun Culture money is we don't have any pipeline, right? So we're putting all this effort in to build this pipeline, all this resources, all this complexity, and then we get to this stage and they turn you down. Like, what is going on? And they go back to the same people they know. And then at the very, very stage, even after you've gotten DFI, oh my God, they've come in, they're ready for this, we've lined up already another debt funder, you then can't find the equity piece again. So it's kind of like this narrowing thing where you actually get more and more pointed solutions at this later stage where you can have big impacts. And we need more and more kind of collaboration and coordination at this early stage, which isn't necessarily happening. So how are we going to solve this? For our sins. We've come up with the problem. Everybody's agreeing that we kind of know, right? This data's saying what we think it does. We're all kind of agreeing on things. But how do we move from this discussion to actual stuff that can move this conversation forward? So rather than us breaking out into another exercise, because we've only got like 25 minutes left, and we'll show the tool as well, I think we started already getting to it too. But what are some of those kind of very pointed things or actions that you think we could take out of this that you want to put your hand up and say, this would be interesting? Is there particular sectors that we should focus on? We said it's a massive space. Should we be doubling down onto health, which seems, I know what you two will say, but she might say water treatment. Is there particular sectors we need to mobilize around? What are some of the things that we need to improve in terms of coordination, or what can we actually do to actually take that forward? And then the last thing is, and this is something I've weirdly been doing work in for like the last 5 years as well, which is, why is this gender gap not moving? And how do we? And I think, do we solve 1 and 2? Does it help solve 3, or is there something else we necessarily need to think about? So, do we have anybody that wants to kickstart? Because it was like the same thing just now. It took one person to raise their hand and start, and then we've all got some thoughts on it as well. Are there any particular sectors that we think we should be more focused on going forward rather than trying to solve this whole iceberg? We can also do the exercise, if you guys would prefer to do that for 5 minutes, but we're not going to have a chance to wrap up and talk about that just looking at the time. Okay. I see it's a little bit quiet. Okay. Yasmin, you're going to break us open first. Yeah.
It's somewhat controversial and obviously easy for me to do since I'm not a donor, but I wonder if one of the most practical things could be to get some of those funders in the room with like a Prithvi and just say, what would it take for us to, there's some really good ideas, right? It's not just, it's that specific focus to unlock the bottleneck from transition to scale or whatever that piece is. So it's the technical and financial need, but also it's the idea of, do we need only one mechanism? Is there a way to have, it's not black and white. It could be a combination of these different kinds of things. Like, even if one set of partners or funders can try it and figure it out and make a commitment, it could serve as a learning for other people. I think we've just got to do it.
Is there a particular stage or sector you think we should try it in?
I'm biased.
That's
I think
fine.
It should be in health.
Okay.
But also the stages, I think it could be my bias, but from what I saw on your data and also on our heat map, it's that point between, I think, 0.5 to 2 million. And it's also, to me, that might correspond to the time when innovators are trying to go from proof of concept to now, how do we transition to scale? So that's one idea, but maybe there's 2 or 3 different, maybe there's 2 bottleneck areas they could try and work it on.
Okay, we've got Ben, we've got this gentleman, we've got this gentleman, and then we've got Grace. So you don't tell me your name.
Sorry, so thinking ahead, we have the grant-making space that we're operating, many folks are operating in, but ultimately we were looking for recurrent revenue. Who are the ultimate customers in any given lane that we want to pick here, any sector? Who ultimately are the paying customers we want as businesses to be working with, to be having a relationship with? And so is there a opportunity to de-risk with future revenue guarantees, or I had it written down here. So thinking about co-investment structures where pharma, in our case, or other corporate partners that might be buying these solutions are providing revenue guarantees to unlock concessional debt. That would be useful for us, kind of moving beyond grants.
And what stage would that be at?
later stage.
Later stage,
Yeah.
but the health continuum still.
Yeah. Well, for us, it would be health.
Okay.
So just trying to think about, I think we are at fault in terms of distorting the market as NGOs. And I say this also based on what he said in terms of we are constantly ticking boxes and constantly funding the same kind of people, because then we like things easy, the easy way, which is usually send a call for proposals, and the people who will always apply are the ones who understand our language as donor community, yeah? But then you'll most of the times find that the people doing amazing things, things with a business case, a product, are the ones who probably don't even understand how to write a proposal or how to actually do an application. And these I speak from actually real practical examples within care that we have actually seen. People who are doing good things are not in these rooms, are not in high-level sort of rooms. So is this something we can do in terms of changing that? Because for me, it's a systemic sort of virus that we have as NGOs, and I included, or care included as well. Is there a way to flip that so that we don't constantly fund the same sort of people? We constantly don't get to the same kind of businesses that actually know how to speak our language, yeah? And I think also it's a question of, from what I see it, I think it's a question of, are we looking for social enterprises or are we looking for businesses in their purity? Because I think those two have different forms of financing that they need and approach, but then we are always finding ourselves in the same sort of murky waters, addressing them in the same way and looking at them the same way. Because for me, I think, and this is something I've said to care as well and the management and trying to do it, is I think businesses in their purity are different from a social enterprise. And we need to be very clear on that. But for me, I think an action point would be, how can we change this systemic virus that we have as NGOs and have constantly been getting it out into enterprises? And yeah, thanks.
Great points. Okay. Did this guy want to go again? Do you want to? Okay. Grace.
Yeah, but some things, you are going to get a lot at the beginning and you are going to get less at the end, and that is normal and fine, and that's actually kind of what we want to see, because that's kind of, we want things to evolve and develop over time. I guess a question would be to you is, often this financing doesn't come by itself, right? It often comes with kind of a venture piece. It often comes with some sort of technical assistance or some sort of support, either on kind of a specific sectoral support or business support. Did that play any role in kind of this thing you saw around capital stacks? Just wondering if you reflect on that or if that came in at all. So a question for you.
It's a great point. Actually, one of the outcomes from the study we did with GIZ was to dive into that in this venture studio project at the early stage. And at the last session we hosted at AVPA, one of the biggest problems is, how do you make that business model work? Because the size of funding is so small, the technical assistance is so much, that the unit economics for a fund don't necessarily work there. And one of the things was, how do we construct funds that can basically work at that level? And I think this is what Pretty you're saying as well, but we don't have enough evidence on those that people can allocate capital to them yet and understand really what's working. And it's slightly different than the accelerator model, which to Josiah's point, which I bet you he'd prefer not to have to do them all the time, but that's more, how many entrepreneurs can we push through a system? Whereas the model here is more, how do we get follow-on funding? And I think that is something now we're looking more at. And if anybody's interested in that, please do reach out as well. We've got two more. Do you want to have last word before Josiah, or Matthias, you go first, and then we can go to.
I actually do have a question, because responding also to the first response, saying like, why is there not one kind of instrument where we pool also as the DFIs together? I just wonder, be careful what you wish for. Yeah. No, so this was also one thing that came to our mind. Like, would it be something that we set up a proxy that it's easier because also on the venture side it would less of a resource and so on. But is there also an upside of not having that? Because we are all different, and you might go with that one. So just challenging you on this thought, we also have that one, that from a kind of like cost perspective, it would be amazing because we would lower our cost also in shrinking budgets and so on. But do we lose something if we do it? And is it worth it? So just putting it out there and seeing like, if we do that, like, is it good? Do we want that?
So what's the risk of collaboration?
So it's standardization and perhaps also losing diversity or different approaches. So like there might be doors closing if we do this, but it might also be a good thing. I'm not having an opinion on that. I'm just exploring.
Runs the risk of what we've seen a little bit with the blended finance instruments to date, right? Which is it going to the same company everybody can agree on. It always takes a question to get everyone warmed up, and okay, Max is going to be disciplined with the time.
Yeah,
and he's going to be like, the point of this was a tool, and then we're going to have 10 minutes for it, but that's neither here nor there.
But to your question, who gets to decide the sectors that we're supposed to go in, right? And if we decide to go in that direction and say we're going to choose, let's say, fintech, for example, then we should design it from the perspective of, do we have the capacity in terms of mentors, the policy and everything else in place? Because what will naturally happen is right now everything's AI, right? So then you get startups jump onto the AI bandwagon. I create a startup that is doing something with AI, but then the government policy will shut that down real quick. See, so then the investment that you've put in, then what happens to that? So I think if we're going to design a program and say we're going into this particular sector, we need to make sure that every single box is ticked off. Policy is favorable, the environment is favorable, we have the right players, whether it's funding, what they call it, mentors, the right accelerators, and even, I would say, startups that are ready to take up this challenge before we decide this is the sector that we're going in. Because otherwise, then you're going to create a situation where we follow trends. See, so everybody's doing this, so then we do that, and then we create a whole bunch of solutions where policy can just get in the way. So it's easy to have this conversation and say, what sector do we need to go in? But before we agree, we need to tick all the boxes that will make sure that the bottlenecks won't get in the way.
What's the criteria? So it's this risk of the supply-driven approach. So the lady at the back hasn't said anything yet, so we'll give final word, and then I'm going to show you guys this, which Anne is going to introduce to us, which obviously is solving everything we've discussed today. I'm teasing. Okay.
So even as I would want to contribute in terms from our perspective, my perspective, especially looking at the government side. There's a lot that can be done in terms of financing of the innovators. But some of the challenges that we also face, especially in terms of acquisition, especially on the government side, has to do with the legal framework. So you see, most of the laws that exist had been done years earlier. For example, the procurement law, which is 2015, for example. Other laws that would support are not also moving in tandem with the innovations that are on the ground, or the pace at which innovations are moving. So it would be important that even as we look at other factors, there's also need for us to look at how do we create an enabling environment, especially within the regulatory framework on the government side, so that these it aligns well with the innovations as we continue to innovate. This makes it easier for innovators to access the government. And this actually is a struggle for many innovators and even the governments when whenever these innovators reach the government side. So we need to also project when they get there, then what? Yes.
So, I mean, I think something coming out like within this discussion is how do we effectively collaborate across such a broad range of stakeholders to enable startups to be successful. And it's not just the financing piece, it's the regulation piece, it's the technical assistance piece as well that we need to get right. And I think that's a lot of what I think IDIA wants to do going forward as well with this work, is just using this as a starting point to see how we can bring together almost smaller pockets of communities to try to test and get stuff done. Because I think to some extent, one of the biggest challenges, if we try to solve everything at the same time, we're going to get stuck in our own internal processes, which was the very thing that we were trying to prevent happening. So I think going forward, I know GIZ's very keen on this, is kind of supporting this project. I know IDIA is what does maybe the next session look like, where it's maybe a particular sector, a particular stage, maybe a particular region, where we can bring together a community of stakeholders active in that area around specifically that, to start saying, okay, what are the different pieces we need to have moving together? And we're trying as Brighter with IDIA and with GIZ to see how we can continually input data and intelligence into that conversation and make it granular and insightful for you all as you're going into it. The data's not going to solve everything, right? But I think what was nice about today is that it's good to start a conversation. So all that data we've shared with you, that comes from our Brighter Intelligence data room, and we build these kind of different products, Brighter Intelligence, AgBase and stuff, which are not in prototype version or online, but we've taken that data and we've aligned it to this IDIA capital continuum, and we've tried to give you some different lenses that the IDIA community can use when trying to make sense of what's happening in their market, who they need to collaborate with. So we're not going to get all of the collaboration right, but one of the big things that we often hear is who's funding health? Who's funding it at the scale stage? What we also hear in the ag tech space is who's funding stuff in Cameroon? Who's funding things in different markets as well? So if we go to the next slide, you guys have kind of understood this. It's just introducing the framework. Most important thing here is to understand the deal sizes, because we've mapped these deal sizes to the stage, and that's one of the filters that we have in the rest of the presentation. So Anne is the one that's built this. She's over here. Give her a quick round of applause, please. She's driving it over there. If we go to the next slide, we clap beforehand. We're always worried about data. So basically what you can see here is you can say, okay, I'm in the One Health cluster. The first is looking at the funding landscape. This is a bit like the data that I just provided you, right? You can see what the funding timeline has been, how many companies are getting funded, what the demographics of those are, what instruments are being used. You can go up here and you can, for example, filter by One Health cluster. That might be the best one. And you can pick, for example, let's say mobility and transport. This is always when you run the risk. Ooh, it worked. You can see mobility and transport only really exploded in the last few years. It's a few deals. It's incredibly male. It's much more debt heavy. If we click, let's go to water access and management. Scroll down. Okay, worked again. Great. You can see that there's been a handful of companies over time. It hasn't attracted very much funding. You actually see a lot more than a quarter of founders are female. This is funding volume. I would have expected if you saw a number of deals, you'd expect to see grants. But if you slow down for a sec, unclick this. If you go to the median ticket size, Ann, 170K. When you just looked at mobility, it's about $1 million, right? So the ticket sizes are much, much smaller that we're dealing with. The number of countries these solutions are being rolled out is much less as well. So this gives you a quick overview of what's happening across different clusters. If you go to and you can also filter by country, for example. So if maybe include all the clusters, just so we have enough good data. Let's see, she knows what she's doing here. What country do you want to pick? Nigeria. Okay. Nigeria is a tough story for me. You'll see that it's really struggled over the last few years, particularly to attract funding in this space as well. You can see that where the majority of funding has gone has gone into energy as well. Next is food systems, mobility and transport, water and access management, very limited. So let's go to the next slide, the funders landscape. We'll give you guys all of this run through. So here, for example, you want to know, if you go to funder type, you guys are saying where you operate. Let's, for example, see where banks operate. I don't think this is going to surprise you greatly. Very much at the later stage, right? They're not doing very much stuff at the early stage as well. You can see the type of instruments that they're doing. A lot more debt, but also a lot more local, right? If we go to DFIs, we can see much less local, getting a little bit earlier stage than banks. You can see the composition of funding instruments. You can see that they're almost always repeat. DFIs are going to the same ventures time and time again in terms of what they're supporting. We can also, you can add that all back up. Let's do one health cluster here. Let's pick, for example, food system, agriculture and land use at the top. You can see a lot of it is stuck on this side with a variety of funders, much less getting through here in terms of where funders are active. Let's go to the next slide, Anne. I don't actually know what the one is. Actually, this isn't even a slide, this is a dashboard. So this is kind of interesting. We don't quite know what to do with this yet. We think something's there, which is, say, for example, your One Health application, and you'll see that you can see the whole taxonomy at the end, and you're doing post-harvest processing, which is a competition that Grand Challenge Canada is running. You can actually see what has been the ticket size, the median ticket size that has been done for those types of solutions at different stages as well, using different types of instruments. Because oftentimes, a company wants to say, I'm at this stage, how much do I need to get to the next stage? So this can start helping you think about what the median ticket size are. And interestingly, to Abby's points, grants still exist at the transition to scale stage. They're just much, much bigger. So you can get a lot more into this as well, and then select all the applications again. You can also go over here to funder type. And let's say we want to see impact investors. We had a whole debate whether we should have VC or impact investors as separate. We'll also appreciate your feedback on that. You can basically see what the median ticket size VCs or impact investors do and how it differs across different instruments as well. So if you're saying, okay, I need to raise this amount of funding for my venture, can this be a starting point to figure out what stage I should be looking at? Because what comes next, if we go to the next dashboard, you can then match these to specific companies and specific funders. So say, for example, I'm interested in, I want to do a $1 million check. I know that that's at the transition to scale stage. Is that even right, Ann? I hope so. Transition to scale stage here at the end. And I'm looking for one health cluster, let's say in food systems and value chains. I can then get a list of what companies have recently raised at that round so that I can go and start to identify solutions that I can source for whatever stage of investments I'm trying to do. And if we go to the next slide, which I think is maybe the most valuable one, say we have in our portfolio at the capital stack stage a proof of concept solution, and we are in the One Health application. Let's say it gets so nuanced when you get down to this. We can do climate smart inputs. You can see in terms of the funders who's recently done deals in this space, what deal type they've used, and what company they've recently invested in. So if you're a funder and you're like, my portfolio and company is getting stuck at this particular stage, and I don't know who else to reach out to, I can use this as a starting point. And this only has 11, but if you go down here, you see we've got 26 funders that at this specific capital stage, within this specific application, have recently done investments. And then you can basically use that as a starting point as well. And on our wider platform, you can then click on these companies and you can get funder profiles for them. So the major use cases we see for this is assessing where your market's out, to Josiah's point that he has. The second thing is thinking about your like being able to source a company at the right stage, being able to find co-funders or follow-on funders, and figuring out what ticket sizes you should be thinking about as you're transitioning through. It is 1 o'clock on the dot. That was a lot of information to process. What I'm gonna ask Max to do is for us after this session to be able to share some of the material that we've had, but you also see the One Health taxonomy, so you can filter through what's actually included in any of this nonsense. And then on the next slide, as well, we've got a whole note on our methodology, where the data comes from, how we've categorized things as well. Quick show of hands, or quick up, sideways, down. Would this be useful for any of you? Okay, and well done. A round of applause for the beginning and the end. What we will ask Max to do is we'll try to figure out a way that we can either do like a webinar on this after, where we can maybe show it to a few people in here and also in the wider group, and then we can start to get a little bit of feedback and we can unpack some of the use cases for that. Cool.
Great. Big thanks to David for such an excellent session.